The bitter wind sliced through Katherine Lambert's tattered dress as she crouched beside Eagle Creek, her trembling hands barely able to grip the small tin cup she was attempting to fill with water. 3 days without proper shelter, with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's silver locket around her neck, all that remained of her former life in Boston. The October evening was settling in across the Montana Territory, and the temperature was dropping rapidly, promising a frost by morning. Katherine had never imagined she'd find herself alone in the wilderness of 1876, miles from the nearest town, with night falling and no hope in sight. The stagecoach accident that had stranded her seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had been merely days. The driver and other passengers had perished in the crash, leaving Katherine as the sole survivor, wandering aimlessly through unfamiliar terrain, desperate to find civilization. As the water sloshed over the rim of her cup, her frozen fingers betrayed her, and the tin vessel tumbled into the creek. A sob escaped her throat as she watched her only container disappear downstream. Katherine wrapped her arms around her body, rocking slightly as tears streamed down her dirt-stained cheeks. She was going to die here, alone and forgotten in this savage land. The snap of a twig behind her made her whirl around, nearly losing her balance. A tall figure emerged from between the pines, the last rays of sunlight outlining his broad-shouldered silhouette. A horse nickered softly behind him, and Katherine could make out the shape of a wide-brimmed hat and what appeared to be a rifle slung across his back. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had heard stories of outlaws and savages who roamed these parts, stories that had seemed thrilling and distant in her comfortable Boston parlor but now filled her with terror. "Madam," the voice was deep but gentle, "you all right?" As he stepped closer, the fading light revealed a rugged face with several days' worth of stubble, weathered skin, and eyes the color of the Montana sky. He couldn't have been more than 30, with a strong jaw and an expression of genuine concern. Katherine tried to speak, but her voice cracked from thirst and exhaustion. She attempted to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her. In 3 long strides, he was at her side, steadying her with a firm but gentle grip on her arm. Up close, she could see the dust on his leather vest and the worn handle of his revolver. "You'll catch your death out here," he said, his brow furrowing as he took in her bedraggled appearance and the violent tremors racking her body. "Where's your party?" "Dead," she managed to whisper. "Stagecoach, accident." His eyes widened slightly, but his expression remained calm. "How long you been out here alone?" 3 days, I think." He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. Then, seeming to make a decision, he gestured toward a ridge about half a mile away. "My camp's just over that rise." "You'll warm by my fire, no questions asked." Katherine hesitated, years of propriety warring with her desperate need for survival. "Name's Keenan Nash," he offered, as if sensing her uncertainty. "I run cattle about 20 miles south of here, was tracking some strays when I spotted you." "Katherine Lambert," she replied, her voice barely audible. Keenan nodded once, then, with careful movements, removed his buckskin jacket and draped it around her shoulders. The warmth of it enveloped her immediately, along with the scent of leather, wood smoke, and horse. "Can you walk?" he asked. Katherine attempted to take a step, but swayed dangerously. Without another word, Keenan scooped her into his arms as if she weighed no more than a child. She wanted to protest no man besides her father had ever held her so intimately, but she lacked the strength. Instead, she found herself leaning her head against his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat strangely comforting. He carried her to where a handsome chestnut gelding waited patiently among the trees, then carefully settled her in the saddle before mounting behind her. One strong arm encircled her waist, holding her securely against him as he guided the horse with his other hand. "It's not far," he said quietly. "Just hold on." As they rode in silence, Katherine fought to stay conscious, the gentle swaying of the horse and the warmth of the man behind her making it increasingly difficult to keep her eyes open. When they crested the ridge, she saw the welcoming glow of a campfire in a small clearing, a bedroll laid out nearby, and a simple lean-to constructed of canvas and branches. Keenan dismounted first, then lifted her down with ease. He guided her to the fire and helped her sit on a fallen log that had been positioned as a makeshift bench. "First things first," he said, rummaging through his saddlebags. He produced a canteen and offered it to her. "Small sips now, too much at once will make you sick." Katherine accepted the canteen with trembling hands, the cool water like heaven on her parched throat. She forced herself to drink slowly as Keenan busied himself with the horse, removing its saddle and bridle before securing it to a nearby tree with a long lead that allowed the animal to graze. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked, returning to the fire. "Yesterday morning," she replied. "I found some berries." Keenan's expression darkened. "Lucky you didn't poison yourself. Not everything that looks edible out here is." He pulled a cast iron skillet from his pack and set it on the stones around the fire. From a cloth-wrapped package, he produced several strips of dried meat and a handful of what looked like beans and dried vegetables. "It's not much," he said apologetically, "but it'll fill your belly." As he worked, Katherine watched him through half-closed eyes. Despite his rough appearance, there was a gentleness to his movements, a quiet efficiency that spoke of years living in the wilderness. In the flickering firelight, she could see that his hair beneath the hat was the color of dark honey, tied back at the nape of his neck with a leather thong. The aroma of the cooking food made her stomach clench painfully, reminding her just how hungry she truly was. When Keenan handed her a tin plate a short while later, she had to force herself not to devour the simple meal in seconds. "Thank you," she said between careful bites. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." Something flashed in his eyes, sorrow, perhaps, or recognition of what she'd left unspoken. "No need for thanks, Miss Lambert. Anyone would have done the same." But they both knew that wasn't true. The West was a harsh place where human kindness was as scarce as water in summer. As the food and warmth began to revive her, Katherine became increasingly aware of her inappropriate situation alone in the wilderness with a stranger, a man who now studied her with quiet intensity. "Where were you headed?" he asked, breaking the silence. "Before the accident." "Weaverville," she replied. "In Montana Territory. My uncle has a mercantile there." Keenan nodded. "Know the place, small town about 40 miles northeast of here." 40 miles, Katherine's heart sank. It might as well have been 1,000. "We can start out at first light," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "Should take us 3 days, riding double, roads too rough for a woman on her own anyway." Relief washed over her, followed immediately by concern. "I couldn't impose on you further, Mr. Nash. You've already done so much." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Keenan," he corrected, "and it's no imposition. I was headed back that way anyhow, got business in town." Katherine doubted the truth of that statement, but she was in no position to refuse his help. "I have no way to repay you," she admitted. "Never asked for payment." He poured more coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Drink this. It'll help warm you from the inside." As the night deepened around them, Katherine found herself telling Keenan about the stagecoach accident, how a wheel had broken on a steep descent, sending the vehicle tumbling down a ravine. She'd been thrown clear, somehow, while the others remained trapped as the coach caught fire. She'd tried to help them, but the flames spread too quickly. "I should have done more," she whispered, staring into the fire. "Sounds like there wasn't anything more to be done," Keenan replied after a moment. "Sometimes fate deals a hand we can't outplay." When she'd finished her coffee, Keenan rose and went to his bedroll. He shook it out, then laid it close to the fire. "You should rest," he said, gesturing to the bedroll. "I'll keep watch." "But where will you sleep?" "I've sat up through plenty of nights," he answered with a shrug. "One more won't hurt." Too exhausted to argue, Katherine gratefully sank onto the bedroll, still wrapped in his jacket. As she drifted toward sleep, she watched through heavy-lidded eyes as Keenan added wood to the fire, his profile strong against the darkness beyond their small circle of light. "Thank you," she murmured again, just before sleep claimed her. She thought she heard him reply, "Sleep well, Miss Lambert." But she couldn't be certain as the world faded away. Katherine woke to the scent of coffee and the soft sounds of movement nearby. Opening her eyes, she found sunlight filtering through the pine branches overhead and Keenan crouched by the fire, stirring something in the small pot. For a moment, the events of the previous day seemed like a dream, but the unfamiliar weight of his jacket still around her shoulders confirmed their reality. "Morning," Keenan said, noticing she was awake. "How are you feeling?" Katherine sat up slowly, taking inventory of her body. Every muscle ached, and her hands were raw from her days of wandering, but she felt markedly better than she had the night before. "Much improved, thank you," she replied, attempting to smooth her hopelessly tangled hair. She must look a fright, she realized, suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. "There's a stream about 50 yards that way," he said, gesturing with his coffee cup. "Clean water if you want to wash up, I'll keep my distance." Gratitude welled within her at this small consideration for her dignity. "I would appreciate that." Keenan nodded, then handed her a small square of soap and a clean, if somewhat worn, handkerchief from his pack. "Take your time, breakfast'll be ready when you get back." The cold water of the stream was shocking but refreshing as Katherine did her best to make herself presentable. She washed her face and hands, then dampened her hair enough to tame it into a simple braid. The dress she wore was beyond saving torn in several places and stained with dirt and grass, but at least she could feel somewhat human again. When she returned to the camp, Keenan had laid out a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with a bit of molasses. It wasn't the elegant fare she was accustomed to in Boston, but at that moment, it looked more appetizing than any fancy breakfast she'd ever had. As they ate, Keenan outlined his plan. "We'll follow Eagle Creek northeast for about 15 miles, then cut across to join the main road to Weaverville. Should make good time if the weather holds." "And if it doesn't?" Katherine asked, glancing at the clear blue sky overhead. "Then we find shelter and wait it out." He regarded her thoughtfully. "Traveling's going to be hard on you, especially riding double. You sure you're up to it?" Katherine straightened her spine. "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Nash, and I'm certainly not afraid of a little discomfort given the alternative." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Never suggested you weren't strong, Miss Lambert, just wanted to prepare you for the journey." They broke camp efficiently, with Keenan showing her how to pack the bedroll and cooking supplies. When everything was secured to the horse, he helped her mount, then swung up behind her with practiced ease. The first few hours of riding were relatively comfortable, with Keenan keeping a respectful distance between their bodies despite the constraints of sharing a saddle. He was quiet but attentive, occasionally pointing out landmarks or identifying birds that caught his eye. By midday, however, Katherine's unused muscles were screaming in protest, and she couldn't suppress a small groan as they forded a shallow section of the creek. "Need to rest?" Keenan asked immediately. "I'm fine," she insisted, though her body disagreed vehemently. Keenan made a sound that might have been a chuckle. "There's a clearing up ahead. We'll stop for a spell." The small meadow he'd spotted provided a perfect resting place with soft grass for the horse to graze and a fallen log where Katherine could sit. Keenan helped her down, his hands strong and steady at her waist, then busied himself with the horse while she stretched her aching limbs. "You ride well," he commented, joining her with jerky and hardtack from his provisions. "Most city folk bounce around like sacks of grain." Katherine accepted the food with a smile. "My father kept horses in Boston. I've ridden since childhood, though never for such distances." "Your father," Keenan said carefully, "will he be worried about you?" A shadow crossed her face. "My parents both passed last winter, influenza." Keenan's expression softened. "I'm sorry." "That's why I was coming west," she continued after a moment. "Uncle James is my only remaining family. He wrote offering me a position in his shop after hearing of their deaths. And you left everything you knew to come to Montana." There was a note of admiration in his voice. Katherine nodded, absently touching the silver locket at her throat. "There was nothing left for me in Boston. Our home, my father's business, everything had to be sold to pay his debts." They ate in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their thoughts. Katherine found herself studying Keenan when he wasn't looking the way the sunlight caught in his honey-colored hair, the strong line of his jaw beneath the stubble, the capable hands that had saved her life. "What about you?" she asked eventually. Have you always been in Montana? Keenan's face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. No, came west after the war, worked cattle drives in Texas for a few years, then drifted north, bought my spread about 5 years back. The war, Katherine repeated softly. You fought for the Union? Enlisted at 17, he confirmed. Saw more than my share before it was over. The simple statement hinted at depths of experience Katherine could scarcely imagine. At 22, she'd led a sheltered life in comparison, despite its recent hardships. And your family, she ventured. Gone, he replied, his tone indicating the subject was closed. He stood abruptly, brushing crumbs from his trousers. We should move on if we want to make decent ground before sundown. The rest of the day passed in relative silence, with Keenan seemingly lost in memories Katherine's questions had stirred. By late afternoon, dark clouds were building on the western horizon, and the air had taken on the sharp scent that presaged rain. Storm's coming, Keenan observed, scanning the sky. Need to find shelter before it hits. They pushed on, the horse picking up its pace as if sensing the urgency. Just as the first fat droplets began to fall, Keenan spotted an overhang in a rocky outcropping about a quarter mile ahead. There, he said, pointing, should keep us dry. They reached the natural shelter just as the heavens opened, rain coming down in blinding sheets. The overhang was deep enough to accommodate them and the horse, with room to spare for a small fire if needed. Keenan helped Katherine dismount, then quickly unsaddled the horse and rubbed it down with a scrap of blanket. By the time he'd finished, both he and Katherine were shivering from the sudden drop in temperature that had accompanied the storm. We need a fire, he said, eyeing the wet landscape dubiously. Will you be able to find dry wood? Katherine asked, hugging herself for warmth. Keenan nodded, already removing his hat. Stay here, I'll be quick. Before she could protest, he darted out into the downpour, disappearing into the trees that bordered the rocky area. Katherine watched anxiously, the minutes stretching as lightning split the sky and thunder rolled across the valley. When he finally returned, Keenan was soaked to the skin, but he carried an armload of relatively dry branches and twigs he'd managed to find beneath dense evergreens. You're drenched, Katherine exclaimed, helping him arrange the wood. Had worse, he replied with a shrug, though his teeth were chattering. From a pouch at his belt, he produced a small tin containing what looked like waxed cloth and tinder. With practiced motions, he built a small teepee of the driest twigs, placed the tinder beneath it, and struck a match. The fire caught slowly at first, then grew steadier as Keenan carefully added larger pieces of wood. Soon, a respectable blaze was casting warmth and light into their temporary shelter. You should remove your wet clothes, Katherine said, then blushed furiously as she realized the impropriety of her suggestion. Keenan's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. Turn your back, he said simply. Katherine obeyed, listening to the rustling sounds as Keenan stripped off his sodden shirt and trousers. After a moment, he said, It's safe now. When she turned, she found him wrapped in the bedroll, his wet clothes spread on rocks near the fire to dry. His chest and shoulders remained bare, and Katherine quickly averted her eyes, though not before noticing the map of scars that traversed his torso, some that looked like bullet wounds, others like knife slashes. The war, she thought. And whatever life he'd led afterward. The rain's not letting up, Keenan observed, breaking the awkward silence. We'll have to make camp here for the night. Katherine nodded, suddenly aware of how the day's riding had taken its toll on her body. Every muscle protested as she shifted position. You're hurting, Keenan said, noticing her discomfort. Just sore from the ride, she admitted. I'll be fine by morning. Keenan rummaged in his pack and produced a small flask. Whiskey, he explained at her questioning look. Good for what ails you. Katherine hesitated, then accepted the flask. The liquor burned a path down her throat, but almost immediately a pleasant warmth spread through her limbs. Thank you, she said, returning the flask. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and something electric passed between them, making Katherine's breath catch. Keenan's eyes, illuminated by the firelight, met hers for a long moment before he looked away. Should eat something, he said, his voice rougher than before. Got some dried beef and beans left. They shared the simple meal in silence, the rain drumming on the rocks above them and the fire crackling between them. As night fell, the temperature dropped further, and despite the fire, Katherine found herself shivering again. "Here," Keenan said, noticing her distress. He unwrapped part of the bedroll from around himself and extended it toward her. "We can share. Body heat's the best way to keep warm out here." Katherine hesitated, propriety warring with practical need. In Boston, even sitting this close to a man to whom she wasn't related would have caused a scandal. Sharing a blanket was unthinkable, but this wasn't Boston, and without Keenan's help, she would already be dead. "Thank you," she said quietly, moving to sit beside him. Carefully, Keenan wrapped the bedroll around both of them, keeping a respectful few inches between their bodies. But even that small distance seemed charged with awareness as they sat side by side, watching the flames dance. "Tell me about your ranch," Katherine said, partly to distract herself from the proximity of his bare chest under the blanket. Keenan's expression softened slightly. "It's not much. Small, spread in a valley about 20 miles south of Weaverville. Good water, decent grazing. Run about 200 head of cattle. Do you live there alone? Got a hand who helps with the cattle. Sela's old-timer who was with the outfit when I bought it, lives in a cabin on the property." He poked at the fire with a stick. "And there's Millie." Millie. Katherine felt an unexpected twist in her stomach. "My dog," Keenan clarified, a genuine smile breaking across his face for the first time. "Best cattle dog in 3 territories." "Oh," Katherine said, inexplicably relieved, "you must miss them." "Sela's can handle things for a spell," Keenan replied. "But yeah, I'll be glad to get home." Home. The word hung between them, reminding Katherine that she had none, not anymore. Just an uncle she barely remembered and a town she'd never seen. As if sensing her thoughts, Keenan added, "Weaverville's not a bad place, small but decent folk mostly. Your uncle's store is right on the main street, does good business." "You know my Uncle James," Keenan nodded. "Everyone knows everyone in Weaverville, it's that kind of town." "What kind of man is he?" Katherine asked, realizing she knew almost nothing about the relative who was to be her new guardian. Keenan considered the question. "Fair, honest in his dealings, bit stern maybe, widowed about 10 years back, no children." It wasn't much, but it was more than Katherine had known before. She tried to picture this stern, childless widower who was her father's brother, but no clear image formed. "He'll look after you," Keenan added, as if sensing her unease. "You'll be safe there, safe." It seemed such a foreign concept after the past few days, and yet, sitting here beside this quiet, capable man, Katherine realized she felt safer than she had since her parents died. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly. "You could have ridden past, many would have." Keenan was silent for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "War taught me that living or dying sometimes comes down to whether someone stops to help or keeps riding. I've been on both sides of that choice." The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep within Katherine. On impulse, she reached out and placed her hand on his forearm. "Well, I'm grateful you stopped." Keenan looked down at her hand, then up at her face. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. "You should rest," he said after a moment, his voice gentle. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Katherine nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she truly was. As they rearranged themselves to lie down, still sharing the bedroll for warmth, she found herself with her back pressed against Keenan's chest, his arm draped carefully over her waist to keep the blanket secured around them. "Is this proper?" she whispered, though she made no move to shift away from his warmth. "Out here, survival trumps propriety," Keenan replied, his breath warm against her hair. "But I promise you're safe with me, Miss Lambert." "Katherine," she corrected sleepily. "After all this, I think you should call me Katherine." The last thing she remembered before drifting off was the gentle pressure of his arm around her and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her back. Katherine dreamed of fire and falling, of desperate cries for help that went unanswered. In her dream, she was running through an endless forest, searching for something or someone she couldn't name. Just as panic threatened to overwhelm her, strong arms encircled her, and a deep voice murmured reassurances. She woke with a start to find those arms were real. Sometime in the night she must have turned in her sleep, for she now faced Keenan, her head tucked beneath his chin, her hands pressed against the warm skin of his chest. His arms held her securely, one hand resting protectively on her back. For a long moment, Katherine remained perfectly still, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. The impropriety of their position should have horrified her, yet she felt only a profound sense of peace and rightness. The gray light of dawn was just beginning to filter into their shelter, revealing that the rain had stopped during the night. The fire had burned down to embers, but Katherine felt no chill, wrapped as she was in the cocoon of warmth they had created together. Keenan stirred, his arms tightening briefly around her before awareness seemed to return. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze with momentary confusion that quickly cleared. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," Katherine replied softly, making no move to extricate herself from his embrace. They remained that way for a heartbeat longer than propriety allowed, something unspoken passing between them. Then, with obvious reluctance, Keenan released her and sat up. "Storms past," he observed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Should be able to make good time today," Katherine nodded, suddenly shy as she adjusted her rumpled dress. "Yes, of course." Keenan rose and checked his clothes, which had dried overnight near the fire. "I'll step outside while you prepare yourself," he said, gathering the garments. "Then we can have some coffee before heading out." After he'd left the shelter, Katherine took a moment to compose herself, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar emotions swirling within her. She had known Keenan Nash for barely a day, yet she felt connected to him in ways she couldn't articulate. It was foolish. Of course she was bound for Weaverville and a new life with her uncle, while Keenan would return to his ranch and his solitary existence. Their paths had crossed by chance, nothing more, yet as she smoothed her hair and straightened her dress as best she could, Katherine couldn't help remembering the feel of his arms around her, the steady rhythm of his heart, the sense of safety she'd found in his presence. When she emerged from the shelter, she found Keenan had rekindled the fire and was brewing coffee in the small pot. His hair was damp, suggesting he'd washed in the nearby creek, and he'd shaved with a straight razor, revealing the strong line of his jaw. "Feel better?" he asked, glancing up at her approach. "Much," she replied, accepting the tin cup of coffee he offered, "though I fear I'm not quite presentable by Boston standards." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Boston standards don't count for much out here." They broke their fast with the last of the jerky and hardtack, then efficiently packed up camp. As Keenan saddled the horse, Katherine found herself watching the practiced movements of his hands, the way the muscles in his back shifted beneath his shirt. When he caught her looking, she quickly averted her gaze, a flush rising to her cheeks. The day's journey proceeded much as the previous one had, with Keenan seated behind her on the horse, one arm loosely around her waist to steady her. But something had changed between them, a newfound awareness, a tension that hadn't existed before. Each time the horse's gait brought them closer together, Katherine felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger or fear. They spoke little as they rode, but it was a comfortable silence, broken occasionally by Keenan pointing out landmarks or wildlife. By midday, they had reached the main road to Weaverville, little more than a rutted dirt track, but a welcome sight nonetheless. "Should make better time now," Keenan said as they paused to rest the horse. "Might even reach town by tomorrow afternoon if we push on." Katherine nodded, trying to ignore the pang she felt at the thought of their journey ending. "That's good news." Keenan studied her face, his expression unreadable. "Your uncle will be glad to see you safe." "Yes," she agreed, though uncertainty gnawed at her. What if Uncle James wasn't pleased to have a niece thrust upon him? What if life in Weaverville proved unbearable? What if Katherine, Keenan's voice broke into her spiraling thoughts, "It'll be all right." The simple assurance, coupled with the first use of her given name from his lips, steadied her. She managed a small smile. "Yes, of course it will." They continued along the road, passing occasional homesteads and seeing other travelers for the first time since Katherine's ordeal began. Each passing wagon or rider nodded in greeting. some casting curious glances at the unusual pair they made Katherine in her tattered dress, seated before the taciturn cowboy. As afternoon waned, Keenan guided the horse off the road toward a small copse of trees beside a shallow stream. "We'll make camp here for the night," he said. "Last stretch tomorrow." The routine of setting up camp had become familiar to Katherine, and she found herself working alongside Keenan with an ease that belied their short acquaintance. As she helped gather wood for the fire, their hands brushed, sending a jolt of awareness through her that made her nearly drop the kindling. "Sorry," Keenan murmured, though he made no move to step away. "It's nothing," Katherine replied, her voice breathier than she intended. That evening, as they sat beside the fire sharing the last of Keenan's provisions, augmented by a rabbit he had managed to snare, Katherine found the courage to ask a question that had been on her mind since their first night together. "What will you do after you've delivered me to Weaverville?" Keenan poked at the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise into the darkening sky. "Head back to the ranch. Winter's coming. Got preparations to make. Will you come into town sometimes?" She kept her eyes on the flames, afraid of what her expression might reveal. There was a long pause before Keenan answered. "Got no reason not to." It wasn't much, but it was enough to kindle a small flame of hope in Katherine's chest. She risked a glance at him and found his eyes already on her, their blue depths reflecting the firelight. "I'd like to thank you properly," she said. "Perhaps, when I'm settled, you could come for supper. I'm quite a good cook despite my appearance at present." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Might take you up on that." Later, as they prepared for sleep, the question of sleeping arrangements hung unspoken between them. The night was clear and considerably warmer than the previous one, with no rain threatening. There was no practical need to share the bedroll for warmth. Yet when Keenan spread it on the ground near the fire, he hesitated, looking at Katherine with a question in his eyes. "It gets cold in the small hours," she said softly. "Perhaps, for safety's sake." It was all the invitation Keenan needed. As they settled side by side beneath the stars, his arm came around her waist, drawing her against the solid warmth of his chest. This time, there was no pretense of necessity, only the mutual acknowledgement of something growing between them, fragile and unnamed, but undeniably present. "Good night, Katherine," he murmured, his breath warm against her hair. "Good night, Keenan," she replied, allowing herself to nestle closer. As sleep claimed her, Katherine realized with perfect clarity that whatever awaited her in Weaverville, her life had irrevocably changed the moment Keenan Nash found her shivering beside that creek. Morning brought with it the realization that their journey was nearly at an end. Katherine woke to find Keenan already up and preparing coffee, his expression more guarded than it had been the previous evening. The easy intimacy of the night seemed to have retreated with the dawn, leaving uncertainty in its wake. "We should reach Weaverville by mid-afternoon," Keenan said as they ate a sparse breakfast. "Your uncle's store is on the main street, can't miss it, Lambert's General Mercantile." "Will you come in with me?" Katherine asked, trying to keep the plea from her voice. "To explain what happened." Keenan studied her for a long moment before nodding once. "Course, need to make sure you're settled proper." Relief washed over her, though she knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Soon enough, Keenan would ride away, back to his ranch and his life, while she would begin anew in a town full of strangers. As they rode that morning, Katherine found herself memorizing every detail of their journey, the solid strength of Keenan's arm around her waist, the rhythm of the horse beneath them, the vast Montana sky stretching endlessly overhead. Each mile that brought them closer to Weaverville seemed to pass too quickly, the distance between present and future shrinking with every hoofbeat. By early afternoon, they crested a rise, and Keenan reined the horse to a stop. "There it is," he said, nodding toward the valley below. Weaverville spread before them, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along a main street, with scattered homesteads and businesses radiating outward. It was tiny compared to Boston, but to Katherine's eyes, it appeared both daunting and full of possibility. "It's larger than I expected," she admitted, studying the town that was to be her new home. 1,500 souls or thereabouts, Keenan replied, growing since the railroad spur came through last year. They descended into the valley, the horse picking its way carefully down the slope. As they approached the outskirts of town, Katherine became acutely aware of her appearance, her tattered dress, her hair loosely braided, her face undoubtedly showing the effects of days in the wilderness. What would her uncle think, seeing her arrive in such a state? Keenan seemed to sense her unease. "Folks here understand the realities of travel," he said quietly, "and they respect survival." His words comforted her somewhat, but as they rode down the main street, Katherine still felt the curious stares of townsfolk who paused in their activities to watch them pass. A woman in a calico dress standing outside the millinery, a group of men lounging in front of the saloon. Children playing in the dusty street who stopped their game to gape at the strange pair. Keenan ignored the attention, guiding the horse with confidence toward a large storefront in the center of town. The sign above the door proclaimed Lambert's General Mercantile in bold black letters. "Here we are," Keenan said, bringing the horse to a stop in front of the store. Katherine stared at the building, her heart pounding. Inside was the uncle she barely remembered, the man who would determine the course of her future. She had imagined this moment countless times during her journey west, but now that it had arrived, she found herself frozen with uncertainty. "Katherine," Keenan's voice was gentle as he helped her dismount. "It's going to be all right." She nodded, drawing strength from the steady blue of his eyes. Together, they climbed the 2 steps to the store's porch, and Keenan held the door as Katherine entered. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight outside, but as her eyes adjusted, Katherine took in the rows of shelves stocked with goods of every description: fabric bolts, tools, canned goods, lanterns, and countless other necessities for frontier life. At the far end stood a long counter, behind which a tall, stern-looking man with graying hair and a neatly trimmed beard was serving a customer. Uncle James, she realized, recognizing a hint of her father in the set of his shoulders and the line of his jaw. The customer, a woman in a practical brown dress, concluded her business and turned to leave, nodding politely to Katherine and Keenan as she passed. When she had gone, James Lambert looked up, his gaze settling first on Keenan with a nod of recognition, then shifting to Katherine with growing confusion. "Mr. Lambert," Keenan said, stepping forward, "got someone here I believe you've been expecting." The older man's brow furrowed as he studied Katherine more carefully. Suddenly, his eyes widened in recognition. "Katherine, my brother's daughter?" "Yes, Uncle James," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I apologize for my appearance. There was an accident with the stagecoach. Mr. Nash found me and brought me safely to town." James came around the counter, his expression a mixture of shock and concern. "The stage, we heard it never arrived, but there's been no official word of what happened." "All lost but Miss Lambert," Keenan explained grimly. "Accident in the mountains. She's been through a hard time." James looked from Keenan to Katherine, taking in her disheveled state with growing comprehension. "My God," he said softly, "you're lucky to be alive." "Yes," Katherine agreed, glancing at Keenan, "very lucky." James seemed to gather himself. "Well, you're here now, and that's what matters. Thank you, Nash, for bringing her safely." He extended his hand, which Keenan shook briefly. "I won't forget this," Keenan nodded once. "Just did what anyone would do." An awkward silence fell, broken only by the ticking of a large clock on the wall. Katherine felt the moment of parting approaching with a sense of dread she couldn't quite explain. "I should be going," Keenan said finally, his eyes meeting Katherine's. "Got a long ride ahead." "Of course," James interjected before Katherine could speak. "You must have business to attend to. We've imposed on you enough." Keenan's expression revealed nothing as he tipped his hat to James, then turned to Katherine. "Miss Lambert," he said formally, though his eyes held a warmth that belied his tone. "Glad to see you safely delivered." "Thank you, Mr. Nash," she replied, fighting to keep her voice even, "for everything." Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of all that remained unsaid, all that might have been under different circumstances. Then Keenan turned and walked out of the store, the bell above the door jingling in his wake. Katherine moved to the window, watching as he mounted his horse and with one final glance at the store, rode away down the street. "Katherine," her uncle's voice recalled her attention, "you must be exhausted. Let me show you to your room. There's time for explanations later." As she followed James through the store and up a narrow staircase to the living quarters above, Katherine felt as though she were moving through a dream. The rooms were neat and modestly furnished, with a parlor, small kitchen, and 2 bedrooms opening off a central hallway. "This will be yours," James said, indicating the smaller of the 2 bedrooms. "It's not fancy, but it's comfortable. My housekeeper, Mrs. Benson, comes in 3 times a week. She'll be here tomorrow and can help you with whatever you need." "It's lovely," Katherine said automatically, though she scarcely registered the room's contents. Her mind was still on the retreating figure of the man who had saved her life. James studied her with concern. "You should rest. I'll bring up some tea and sandwiches. Tomorrow, when you're feeling stronger, we can discuss arrangements." Left alone, Katherine sank onto the edge of the bed, emotions she'd held in check finally breaking through. Tears streamed down her face as the full impact of all she'd experienced came crashing down upon her: the terror of the stagecoach accident, the days of desperate wandering, the kindness of a stranger who had become something more. And now, the uncertainty of a new life in a town where she knew no one, save an uncle who was practically a stranger himself. As darkness fell over Weaverville, Katherine stood at her bedroom window, gazing out at the unfamiliar landscape. Somewhere to the south, Keenan Nash was making his way home through the gathering night. She wondered if he was thinking of her, if he would remember the woman he'd found shivering beside a creek, or if she would simply become one more traveler he'd helped along the way. With a sigh, she turned from the window. Whatever the future held, she owed it to Keenan to make the most of the life he had saved. Tomorrow would be soon enough to begin. The following weeks passed in a blur of adjustment for Katherine. Uncle James, while not demonstrative, proved to be fair and considerate, welcoming her into both his home and his business. After her initial recovery, he offered her a position in the store, teaching her the inventory and bookkeeping, tasks for which her Boston education had prepared her well. Weaverville itself was a revelation, a community where everyone knew everyone else's business, where women wore practical clothing and weren't afraid to speak their minds, where survival and hard work were valued above social graces. It was a far cry from the refined circles of Boston society, but Katherine found herself adapting with surprising ease. Mrs. Benson, the housekeeper, helped her acquire suitable clothing and introduced her to other young women in town. Soon, Katherine was being invited to socials and Sunday dinners, gradually becoming part of the community. Yet, despite these outward signs of adjustment, Katherine found her thoughts constantly straying to Keenan Nash. Each time the bell above the store door jingled, she would look up, hoping to see his tall figure silhouetted in the doorway. Each rider passing through town drew her attention, only to disappoint when it proved to be someone else. "You seem distracted today," Uncle James commented one afternoon as they worked together behind the counter, sorting a new shipment of dry goods. "Do I?" Katherine replied, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about inventory. We're running low on lamp oil." James regarded her thoughtfully but didn't press the issue. In the weeks since her arrival, they had developed a relationship based on mutual respect, if not deep affection. James was not given to personal conversations, but he treated Katherine fairly and seemed pleased with her contributions to the store. That evening, as they sat in the parlor after supper, James with his pipe and newspaper, Katherine with her mending, a knock at the store's street door broke the comfortable silence. "Who could that be at this hour?" James muttered, rising from his chair. Katherine listened as he descended the stairs to the store below. The murmur of male voices drifted up, too indistinct to make out the words, then footsteps on the stairs, 2 sets. "Katherine," James called as he reached the top, "you have a visitor." She looked up from her mending, her heart skipping as Keenan Nash stepped into the parlor behind her uncle. He had removed his hat, and his honey-colored hair was neatly trimmed. He wore a clean shirt beneath his leather vest, and his boots had been polished. "Mr. Nash," she said, rising to her feet, struggling to keep her voice steady. "What a surprise." "Miss Lambert," he replied, his blue eyes taking in her appearance with obvious appreciation. The weeks of regular meals and rest had restored her health, and the simple blue dress she wore suited her far better than the tattered garment in which he had last seen her. "Nash was just passing through town," James explained, though his expression suggested he didn't entirely believe this explanation. "Thought he'd check on your welfare." "That's very kind," Katherine said, her eyes never leaving Keenan's face. James cleared his throat. "Well, I have some accounts to review before bed. I'll leave you two to catch up." With a significant look at Keenan, he added, "Not too late, mind. Store opens early." When they were alone, a silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken words. Katherine gestured to the sofa. "Please sit down." "Would you like some tea? Or perhaps something stronger?" "Tea's fine," Keenan replied, settling onto the edge of the sofa as Katherine busied herself with the kettle already warming on the small stove in the corner. "How have you been?" she asked, her back to him as she prepared the cups. "How is your ranch? And Millie, of course." "Ranch is good. Cattle are fattening up before winter. Millie's fine. Missed having someone to boss around while I was gone." There was a smile in his voice that made Katherine's heart flutter. She returned with 2 cups of tea, settling beside him on the sofa, careful to maintain a proper distance. "And you're well?" Keenan nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "Been thinking about you," he said directly, "wondering how you were settling in." The simple admission sent warmth spreading through Katherine's chest. "I've been thinking about you too," she confessed. "Quite often, actually." Something shifted in Keenan's expression, a softening, a hope that matched the feeling blossoming within her own heart. "I meant to come sooner," he said. "Had a situation with some rustlers, took time to sort out." "You're here now," Katherine replied. "That's what matters." They talked for nearly an hour, catching up on the weeks that had passed. Katherine told him about the store, about the friends she was making in town, about her growing comfort with life in Weaverville. Keenan spoke of his ranch, of plans for expansion in the spring, of a new breeding stock he hoped to acquire. Beneath the ordinary conversation ran a current of deeper understanding, of connection that had been forged in the extraordinary circumstances of their meeting and had somehow endured the separation that followed. As the mantel clock struck 9, Keenan reluctantly rose to leave. "Your uncle was clear about the hour," he said with a small smile. "Don't want to wear out my welcome on the first visit." "First visit," Katherine repeated, hope rising within her. "Does that mean there will be others?" Keenan's expression grew serious. "If you'd like that." "I would," she said simply. "Very much." They stood facing each other, the space between them charged with unspoken feelings. Propriety dictated he should take his leave with nothing more than a polite goodbye, but something in Keenan's eyes told Katherine he was considering a different course. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and took her hand in his. "Saturday," he said. "There's a social at the church. Would you allow me to escort you?" Joy bubbled up within Katherine, threatening to overflow. "I would be honored," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Keenan's thumb traced a gentle circle on the back of her hand. "Until Saturday, then," he said then, with a formal bow that somehow managed to be both proper and intensely personal, he took his leave. Katherine stood in the parlor long after the sound of his footsteps had faded, her hand still tingling from his touch. For the first time since arriving in Weaverville, she felt not just acceptance or adaptation, but genuine happiness, a sense that her future might hold more than she had dared to hope. The church social on Saturday became the first of many occasions where Katherine and Keenan were seen together in Weaverville. Through the remaining weeks of autumn and into the early winter, Keenan found reasons to come to town with increasing frequency supplies needed for the ranch, business with the bank, meetings with the Cattlemen's Association. Each visit included time spent with Katherine, whether it was supper above the store with Uncle James, walks along the town streets, or attendance at various community events. As Christmas approached, their growing attachment became a subject of gentle gossip among the townspeople, most of whom approved of the match between the respected rancher and the merchant's niece. "You know, people are talking," Katherine said one evening in mid-December as they walked back to the store after a community choir practice at the church. The night was clear and cold, stars sparkling overhead like diamonds on black velvet. "Let them talk," Keenan replied, his arm linked with hers. "Nothing improper about a man courting a woman he admires." Katherine's heart skipped at the word courting, though this was the first time either of them had put a name to what was happening between them. "Is that what you're doing, courting me?" Keenan stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "If I am, would that be welcome?" "Very welcome," Katherine replied softly. A smile broke across Keenan's face, transforming his usually solemn features. Without warning, he bent and pressed a gentle kiss to her lips, brief, chaste, but filled with promise. "Been wanting to do that since I found you by that creek," he admitted as he drew back. Katherine touched her fingers to her lips, where the warmth of his kiss lingered. "I think I've been wanting you to since then as well." They continued their walk in companionable silence, both aware that something significant had shifted between them. By the time they reached the store, an unspoken understanding had been reached, a mutual acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since their first meeting. Uncle James, watching their courtship with quiet approval, invited Keenan to join them for Christmas dinner. It would be Katherine's first Christmas in Montana, and despite missing her parents, she found herself looking forward to the holiday with genuine anticipation. The day before Christmas, a heavy snow blanketed Weaverville, transforming the town into a winter wonderland. The store closed early, and Katherine spent the afternoon helping Mrs. Benson prepare for the next day's feast. As evening approached, she found herself repeatedly glancing out the window, watching for any sign of Keenan, who had promised to stop by with a Christmas gift. Just as she was beginning to worry that the snow might have deterred him, there was a knock at the store door. Katherine hurried down the stairs, smoothing her hair and straightening her apron before opening the door. Keenan stood on the threshold, snow dusting his shoulders and hat, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. In his arms he carried a small pine tree, its branches lush and fragrant. "Thought you might like a bit of Christmas tradition," he said, stamping his boots to remove the snow. "There's not much decoration in the store." Katherine's heart swelled at the thoughtful gesture. "It's perfect," she said, stepping back to let him enter. "Uncle James will love it too." Together they set up the tree in the parlor, using a bucket filled with stones for stability. Mrs. Benson produced a box of simple ornaments, wooden stars, red berries strung on thread, pine cones dipped in wax, and the three of them decorated the tree while James watched from his armchair, a rare smile softening his stern features. "Reminds me of when your father and I were boys," he commented to Katherine. "Our mother loved Christmas trees." It was the first time he had spoken of her father since her arrival, and Katherine felt a rush of affection for her uncle. "He carried on the tradition," she said. "We always had a tree, even during the war when they were hard to come by." The evening passed in warm companionship, with mulled cider and Mrs. Benson's gingerbread. When it came time for Keenan to leave, Katherine walked him down to the store door, away from the watchful eyes of her uncle and the housekeeper. "I have something for you," Keenan said, reaching into his pocket. "Not much, but I wanted you to have it before tomorrow." He produced a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a simple string. Katherine unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a star, similar to a sheriff's badge but smaller and more feminine. "It was my mother's," Keenan explained, watching her face. "One of the few things I have of hers. Thought it suited you, strong but beautiful." Tears pricked Katherine's eyes at the significance of the gift. "Keenan, I can't accept this. It's too precious." "That's why I want you to have it," he replied simply. Unable to express in words what the gesture meant to her, Katherine stood on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that conveyed everything she couldn't say. Keenan's arms came around her, drawing her close as the kiss deepened, becoming something more than either of them had intended. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, their eyes reflecting emotions too new and powerful to name. "Merry Christmas, Katherine," Keenan murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "Merry Christmas, Keenan," she replied, her heart too full for more elaborate speech. After he had gone, Katherine stood at the window watching his figure recede into the snowy night, the silver brooch clutched in her hand like a talisman. Whatever the new year might bring, she knew with absolute certainty that her life had been irrevocably changed by the man who had found her shivering beside a creek and offered warmth without questions. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the world outside the store windows a pristine expanse of white. Katherine woke early, filled with a sense of anticipation that had little to do with the holiday and everything to do with knowing she would see Keenan again. She dressed with special care in her best dress, a forest green wool that brought out the amber highlights in her hair and pinned Keenan's brooch to the collar. The silver star caught the morning light, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the wall of her bedroom. Uncle James, normally so reserved, surprised her with a gift of his own, a leather-bound journal and a set of good pens. "Thought you might want to write down your experiences," he said gruffly. "New beginnings are worth remembering." Katherine presented him with a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue, which he accepted with more emotion than she had yet seen from him. "Your mother taught you well," he said, running his fingers over the even stitches. "She was always clever with her hands." The morning passed in pleasant domestic activities, with Mrs. Benson overseeing the roasting of a goose and Katherine preparing vegetables and pies. By the time Keenan arrived in the early afternoon, the small apartment above the store was filled with delicious aromas and the warm glow of holiday cheer. He brought with him a bottle of good whiskey for James and a basket of apples and hard candies that he claimed Sela's had insisted on sending. For Katherine, his gift had already been given, but the way his eyes lit up when he saw her wearing the brooch was present enough. The dinner was the most festive occasion Katherine had experienced since her parents' deaths, with conversation flowing as freely as the whiskey James broke out for the occasion. Even Mrs. Benson, usually so proper, allowed herself to be coaxed into telling stories of Christmases passed in her native Pennsylvania. As the short winter day faded toward evening, James and Mrs. Benson tactfully retired to the parlor, leaving Katherine and Keenan alone in the small kitchen to wash the dishes. "Never thought I'd enjoy washing plates so much," Keenan commented as he dried a serving platter Katherine had just rinsed. "It's the company that makes the difference," she replied with a smile. Their hands brushed as she passed him another dish, and the simple contact sent warmth spreading through her. How strange, she thought, that after all they had been through together, sleeping side by side for warmth, riding pressed against each other for days, these small, domestic touches should still affect her so powerfully. "Katherine," Keenan's voice was serious now, all trace of levity gone. "There's something I need to ask you." She turned to face him, her heart suddenly racing. "Yes, I know it hasn't been long," he began, setting down the dishcloth and taking her hands in his. "And maybe this is too soon, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Katherine held her breath, scarcely daring to hope what might be coming next. "I love you," Keenan said simply. "Have since I found you by that creek, I think, though I didn't know it then. Would you consider becoming my wife?" Joy unlike anything Katherine had ever known flooded through her. "Yes," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Oh, Keenan, yes." He gathered her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling through tears. "I should speak to your uncle," Keenan said, his voice rough with emotion. "He'll approve," Katherine assured him, knowing it was true. James had grown to respect Keenan over the past months, and she had seen the approving looks he gave them when he thought she wasn't noticing. They found James in his armchair, pretending to read a newspaper while obviously waiting for them. When Keenan formally asked for Katherine's hand, the older man's face broke into a rare full smile. "About time," he said, rising to shake Keenan's hand. "Was beginning to think I'd have to drop hints." The engagement was announced to the town on New Year's Day, with plans for a spring wedding once the worst of the winter had passed. Katherine threw herself into preparations with enthusiasm, working in the store by day and sewing her wedding dress by night. Keenan rode into town whenever weather permitted, sometimes staying overnight at the hotel rather than risking the journey back to his ranch in darkness. During these visits, they began to plan their future together. Katherine would move to Keenan's ranch after the wedding, but they agreed she would still help in her uncle's store when needed. James, though claiming he was perfectly capable of managing alone, seemed pleased by this arrangement. "Never thought I'd have family again," he admitted to Katherine one evening after Keenan had left. "You're coming here, it's been good, changed things for the better." February brought heavy snows that isolated Weaverville for nearly 2 weeks. Katherine fretted about Keenan, alone at his ranch with only Silas and Millie for company, but when the roads finally cleared, he arrived in town with news that all was well, if a bit lonely without her. "Soon enough we won't have to be apart," he reminded her as they sat together in the store's back room, taking inventory of spring supplies. "April seems very far away," Katherine sighed, leaning her head against his shoulder. Keenan's arm tightened around her. "Worth waiting for," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. As March brought the first hints of thaw, wedding preparations intensified. Mrs. Benson and several other women from town helped Katherine finish her dress, a simple but elegant creation of ivory satin with lace at the collar and cuffs. Keenan, meanwhile, was busy with spring calving at the ranch, but he still managed to ride into town at least once a week, often bringing small gifts, wildflowers just beginning to bloom in sheltered spots, a carved wooden box for her hairpins, fresh eggs from his hens when the town's supply ran low. 2 weeks before the wedding, Keenan arrived with a special surprise, a buggy and a picnic basket. "Thought you might like to see the ranch before the wedding," he suggested. "Weather's fine and the roads dried out enough." With Uncle James's blessing, they set out early on a Saturday morning, the spring sunshine warm on their faces as the buggy rattled along the road south of town. Katherine, who had heard so much about Keenan's home but never seen it, found herself growing increasingly excited as the miles passed. "There it is," Keenan said after about an hour's drive, pointing to a valley nestled between gentle hills. "Nash Ranch." Katherine leaned forward eagerly, taking in the sight below. A sturdy log house with a wide porch stood near a creek that wound through the property. Nearby were a large barn, several corrals, and what appeared to be a bunkhouse. In the distance, cattle grazed on green grass just beginning to emerge from winter's brown. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely, understanding now why Keenan spoke of it with such pride. As they drove down into the valley, a black and white border collie came racing to meet them, barking joyously. "That's Millie," Keenan said with a laugh. "Been wondering where I've been disappearing to, I expect." The dog circled the buggy, tail wagging furiously as they approached the house. On the porch stood an elderly man with a white beard and weathered face who raised a hand in greeting. "And that's Silas," Keenan added. "Been with the place longer than I have." Katherine found herself welcomed warmly into Keenan's home. Silas, though gruff in manner, clearly approved of his employer's choice of bride, showing her around the house with evident pride. The interior was simple but comfortable, with sturdy furniture, braided rugs on the plank floors, and large windows that filled the rooms with light. "Been adding some touches," Keenan said almost shyly as they stood in what would be their bedroom. "Thought you might appreciate curtains." Indeed, the windows were framed with simple curtains of blue checked cloth that softened the room's masculine lines. A quilt in matching colors covered the large bed, and a rocking chair had been placed near the window, thoughtful additions that spoke of Keenan's desire to make her feel at home. "It's perfect," Katherine said, deeply touched by his consideration. "I couldn't have asked for a lovelier place to begin our life together." They spent the day exploring the ranch, with Keenan showing her the spring calves, the kitchen garden he had started in anticipation of her arrival, and the small grove of apple trees that produced fruit in the fall. Millie followed them everywhere, occasionally herding them in a direction she thought they should go. making them both laugh. As the afternoon waned, they enjoyed the picnic. Keenan had packed cold chicken, biscuits, early spring greens from his garden, and apple pie courtesy of Mrs. Benson. Seated on a blanket beneath one of the apple trees, now just beginning to bud, Katherine felt a contentment so deep it almost frightened her. "In 2 weeks, this will be home," she mused, leaning against Keenan's shoulder. "It already is," he replied, his arm around her waist. "Just waiting for you to complete it." The ride back to town seemed all too short, the day having passed more quickly than either of them wished. As they approached Weaverville in the gathering dusk, Katherine found herself already looking forward to the time when such visits would end with her staying at the ranch rather than returning to the store. 2 more weeks, Keenan reminded her as he helped her down from the buggy in front of Lambert's mercantile. Then no more goodbyes. "No more goodbyes," she echoed, standing on tiptoe to kiss him despite the potential for gossip if they were seen. The final preparations for the wedding passed in a blur of activity. The ceremony would be held in Weaverville's small church, followed by a reception at the town hall. Nearly everyone in Weaverville had been invited, along with neighboring ranchers and their families. Katherine, who had arrived in town as a stranger less than a year ago, was touched by how many people seemed genuinely happy for her and Keenan. The night before the wedding, as she laid out her dress and the few personal items she would take to the ranch the next day, Katherine found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. The stagecoach accident that had seemed like the end of all her hopes had, in fact, been the beginning of a new and unexpected happiness. She fingered the silver star brooch that Keenan had given her at Christmas, remembering his words, "Strong but beautiful." In the month since her arrival in Weaverville, she had discovered strengths she never knew she possessed: the ability to adapt, to build a new life, to open her heart to love even after loss. Tomorrow she would become Katherine Nash, wife to the man who had found her at her lowest moment and offered warmth without questions. The future stretched before her, full of promise and possibility. As she drifted off to sleep, Katherine's last thought was of Keenan, his steady presence, his quiet strength, his unwavering love. Whatever challenges they might face, they would face them together. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of the union about to take place. Katherine woke early, a flutter of nervous excitement in her stomach as she realized this was the day she had been anticipating for months. Mrs. Benson arrived shortly after breakfast to help her prepare, bringing with her a small bouquet of wildflowers tied with a blue ribbon. "Something blue," she explained with a wink. "For luck." Uncle James, normally so reserved, seemed almost jovial as he bustled about the store, closing early for the occasion. When Katherine finally descended the stairs in her wedding dress, her hair arranged in an elegant knot adorned with tiny white flowers, the older man's eyes grew suspiciously moist. "You look just like your mother," he said gruffly. "She'd be proud today." The church was filled to capacity when Katherine arrived on James's arm. As the simple organ music began and she started her walk down the aisle, her eyes found Keenan waiting for her at the altar. The look of wonder and love on his face as he watched her approach made her heart soar. He had never appeared more handsome, dressed in a new black suit with a white shirt and string tie. His honey-colored hair was neatly combed, and he had trimmed his beard for the occasion. But it was the expression in his blue eyes that truly took her breath away, a mixture of joy, awe, and unwavering devotion. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion for Katherine. She was aware of the minister's words, of the responses she and Keenan gave, of the cool metal of the simple gold band Keenan slid onto her finger. But most of all, she was conscious of Keenan's hands holding hers, steady and warm, anchoring her in the moment. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister declared at last. "You may kiss your bride." Keenan's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, a public declaration of a love that had begun in the wilderness and would now flourish in the life they would build together. The reception that followed was a joyous affair, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the territory. Katherine found herself passed from one well-wisher to another, accepting congratulations and advice with equal grace. Through it all, Keenan remained at her side, his quiet presence a source of strength and comfort. As evening approached, they prepared to leave for the ranch, which would be their home from this day forward. Uncle James, who would continue to live above the store with Mrs. Benson coming in as before, embraced Katherine with uncharacteristic emotion. "You've brought life back to this old man's world," he murmured. "Don't be a stranger now that you're a married woman." "Never," Katherine promised, kissing his weathered cheek. "We'll be in town often." Their departure from Weaverville was accompanied by cheers, well wishes, and a shower of rice that made Millie, who had been brought to town for the occasion, bark excitedly. As the buggy pulled away, Katherine looked back at the gathered townsfolk, marveling at how these once strangers had become her community, her friends, her family. The journey to the ranch seemed shorter than ever before, perhaps because it was now a journey home rather than a visit. As they crested the rise overlooking the valley, the setting sun gilded the landscape in shades of gold and rose, turning the simple log house into a palace fit for any bride. "Welcome home, Mrs. Nash," Keenan said softly as he helped her from the buggy. "Home," Katherine repeated, the word filled with meaning and promise. "Our home." Silas had prepared the house for their arrival, with fresh flowers on the table and a special supper waiting to be heated. After seeing to the horse and buggy, Keenan returned to find Katherine standing in the center of the main room, taking in the reality that this was now her home, their home. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, only half joking as he studied her expression. Katherine turned to him with a smile that dispelled any doubts. "Only about how long it took us to get here," she replied, crossing the room to wrap her arms around his neck. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Keenan's arms encircled her waist, drawing her close. "Nor I," he murmured against her hair. "You saved me, Katherine, as much as I saved you that day by the creek." "How so?" she asked, lifting her face to his. "Was just existing before," he explained, his voice rough with emotion. "Going through the motions, you brought purpose back, meaning." Katherine's heart swelled at the simple declaration. "Then we saved each other," she said softly, "and will continue to do so every day." Their kiss sealed the promise, a beginning rather than an ending, the first of countless moments they would share in the life stretching before them. Later that night, as moonlight spilled through the curtained windows of their bedroom, Katherine lay in Keenan's arms, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance encounter beside a creek to husband and wife, it seemed both miraculous and somehow inevitable. "What are you thinking?" Keenan asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "About fate," she replied truthfully. "About how sometimes what seems like our darkest moment can lead to our greatest joy." Keenan nodded, understanding without need for further explanation. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns," he agreed. "Grateful this one led to you." As sleep claimed them, wrapped in each other's arms beneath the quilt Keenan had so thoughtfully provided, Katherine's last conscious thought was one of profound gratitude for the man beside her, for the home around them, for the future that awaited them together. Spring gave way to summer, summer to fall, and fall to winter, marking the passage of Katherine and Keenan's first year of marriage. Each season brought its own rhythms and challenges: the grueling work of spring calving, the long days of summer haying, the busy preparation for winter as fall painted the landscape in fiery hues. Through it all, their partnership deepened, each discovering new strengths in themselves and in each other. Katherine proved adept at ranch life, taking over the management of the household, expanding the kitchen garden, and even learning to help with the cattle when extra hands were needed. Keenan, meanwhile, found in Katherine not just a wife but a true partner, someone whose counsel he valued and whose presence made even the hardest days bearable. They still made regular visits to Weaverville, with Katherine helping in the store while Keenan attended to business. Uncle James, who had seemed to grow younger since their wedding, always welcomed them warmly, taking particular pleasure in hearing about life on the ranch. As their first anniversary approached, Katherine began to suspect a change in her condition. The subtle signs were familiar to her from stories shared by married friends in town: the slight nausea in the mornings, the unexpected fatigue in the afternoons, the inexplicable cravings for foods she normally didn't favor. She confirmed her suspicions during a visit to Weaverville, consulting discreetly with Dr. Miller, the town's physician. His gentle examination and questions left no doubt. Katherine was with child due in early summer. She kept the news to herself for several days, wanting to find the perfect moment to share it with Keenan. That opportunity came on a mild spring evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of amber and rose. "Been thinking about adding on to the house," Keenan remarked, his arm around her shoulders as they shared the porch swing. "Another bedroom, maybe, make more space." Katherine's heart skipped at the perfect opening he had unwittingly provided. "That sounds like an excellent idea," she replied, trying to keep her voice casual. "Especially since we'll be needing the extra room come June." For a moment, Keenan continued rocking the swing, her words not fully registering. Then he stilled, turning to look at her with dawning comprehension. "Katherine, are you saying?" She nodded, unable to contain her smile any longer. "We're going to have a baby, Keenan. Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday." Joy transformed Keenan's face as he gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious porcelain. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." Katherine had never seen him so openly affected, not even on their wedding day. As he placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach, a look of wonder in his eyes, she felt a surge of love so powerful it brought tears to her own. "Are you happy?" she asked, though the answer was written plainly on his face. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he replied, pressing his lips to her forehead. "You've given me everything, Katherine, everything that matters." The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. Keenan began work on the addition to the house immediately, determined to have it ready well before the baby's arrival. Katherine, meanwhile, sewed tiny garments in the evenings, her heart full of dreams for the child growing beneath her heart. As her body changed, accommodating the new life within, Keenan's protectiveness intensified. He insisted on taking over the more strenuous household chores, hired an extra hand for the spring work, and watched her like a hawk for any sign of discomfort or fatigue. "I'm pregnant, not ill," Katherine reminded him one afternoon as he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry to the line. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my wife," Keenan replied stubbornly, taking the basket from her hands. "Not my child." "Can't help worrying." Katherine's irritation melted at the genuine concern in his eyes. "I know," she said softly, stretching up to kiss his cheek, "and I love you for it, but truly I'm fine, better than fine." It was true. Despite the occasional discomforts of pregnancy, Katherine had never felt more alive, more connected to the rhythms of life and nature around her. As spring transformed the landscape, bringing new growth and renewal, she felt her own body mirroring that process, nurturing the new life within. June arrived with unseasonable heat, making Katherine's final weeks of pregnancy particularly uncomfortable. The baby, active and strong, seemed in no hurry to make an appearance, despite having passed the date Dr. Miller had estimated for its arrival. "Think the little one's waiting for cooler weather," Silas commented one evening as they sat on the porch, seeking relief from the stuffy house. "Can't say I blame him." Katherine managed a smile, shifting uncomfortably on the cushioned chair Keenan had insisted on bringing outside for her. "I just wish he or she would decide one way or another. This waiting is the hardest part." Keenan, who had been more on edge with each passing day, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Should I ride for the doctor?" he asked, not for the first time that week. "Just to be safe." "Not yet," Katherine assured him, covering his hand with her own. "I'll know when it's time." That time came in the early hours of the following morning. Katherine woke to a sharp pain that started in her back and wrapped around to her abdomen, more intense than the practice contractions she'd been experiencing for weeks. As she shifted in bed, trying to find a more comfortable position, she felt a warm gush of fluid between her thighs. Keenan, she said, shaking his shoulder. It's time, the baby's coming. He was instantly alert, sitting up and lighting the lamp beside the bed. One look at her face told him everything he needed to know. I'll ride for the doctor, he said, already reaching for his clothes. Silas can stay with you until I get back. Katherine nodded, another contraction building. Be careful, she managed through gritted teeth. Don't take any risks. Keenan pressed a quick kiss to her forehead. I'll be back before you know it with the doctor. The next hours passed in a blur of pain and waiting for Katherine. Silas, surprisingly gentle for all his gruffness, helped her walk when the pains allowed, brought cool cloths for her forehead, and maintained a steady stream of distracting conversation between contractions. Keenan was the same way when he was born, the old man revealed, surprising Katherine. Made his mama wait near 2 weeks past her time, then decided to come all in a rush. His pa barely made it back from town with the midwife. You knew Keenan as a baby. Katherine asked, momentarily distracted from her discomfort. Keenan rarely spoke of his childhood, and she had always been careful not to press. Silas nodded, his weathered face softening with memory. Known him his whole life, was working for his daddy in Texas when Keenan was born. Stayed with the family till they passed, then followed the boy when he headed north after the war. The revelation that Silas had such a long connection to her husband gave Katherine a new appreciation for the old man's place in their lives. Before she could ask more, however, another contraction seized her, stronger than any before. It was mid-morning when Keenan finally returned with Dr. Miller, having pushed his horse to the limit of its endurance. The doctor's examination confirmed what Katherine already sensed: the baby was well on its way, progressing faster than expected for a first birth. Won't be long now, Dr. Miller assured them both. Everything looks just as it should. Keenan, his face etched with concern, took Katherine's hand in his. I'll be right outside, he promised, knowing that custom-dictated men should not be present for the actual birth. No, Katherine said firmly, gripping his hand tighter as another contraction built. Stay, please, doctor. Miller raised an eyebrow but nodded when Keenan looked to him for guidance. It's uncommon but not unheard of, the doctor conceded, if it's what the mother wants and the father has the stomach for it. I want him with me, Katherine insisted. We do everything else together. This should be no different. And so Keenan remained, supporting Katherine as she labored, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement when the pain became almost unbearable. His steady presence gave her strength when her own began to flag, his unwavering belief in her carrying her through moments when she doubted her ability to continue. Just past noon, with summer sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that immediately brought tears to both parents' eyes. A fine boy, doctor. Miller announced, placing the squalling infant on Katherine's chest after quickly cleaning and examining him. Strong lungs in all his fingers and toes. Katherine gazed down at the tiny red face, overwhelmed by a love so profound it seemed to transform her very being. Hello, little one, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. We've been waiting for you. Keenan, still holding her hand, seemed unable to speak as he looked at his son for the first time. A single tear tracked down his weathered cheek, the first Katherine had ever seen him shed. He's perfect, he finally managed, his voice rough with feeling. Just like his mother. After the doctor had attended to Katherine and assured himself that both mother and child were doing well, he left them alone to become acquainted with their new family member. Silas, who had been waiting anxiously on the porch, poked his head in briefly to meet the newest resident of Nash Ranch before tactfully withdrawing to spread the news to the hands. What shall we name him? Katherine asked as she nursed their son for the first time, marveling at the tiny fingers that curled around her own. Keenan, seated on the edge of the bed watching them with undisguised wonder, considered the question. Been thinking about James, he suggested. After your uncle. Man's been good to us both, Katherine smiled, touched by the thoughtfulness of the suggestion. James, she repeated, testing the name. James Nash, I think it suits him. Could use my father's name for his middle, Keenan added. William. James William Nash, Katherine said, looking down at the now drowsy infant at her breast. A good, strong name for a good, strong boy. As evening settled over the ranch, Katherine dozed with little James beside her in the bed, exhausted but profoundly content. Keenan, having seen to the necessary chores, returned to find his wife and son sleeping peacefully in the golden light of the setting sun. For a long moment, he simply stood in the doorway, taking in the sight that had transformed his life in ways he could never have imagined when he'd found a shivering woman beside a creek less than 2 years ago. "Thank you," he whispered to whatever fate or providence had guided his steps that day. "For everything." As if sensing his presence, Katherine opened her eyes, a smile spreading across her face when she saw him standing there. "Come meet your son properly," she said, patting the space beside her on the bed. "He's been waiting for his papa." Keenan crossed the room and carefully settled beside them, one strong arm encircling Katherine's shoulders, the other hand gently touching his son's dark hair. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that nothing in his life, not the war, not the years of wandering, not even building his ranch from nothing, had prepared him for the depth of feeling that now filled his heart. "I love you," he said simply, the words encompassing both Katherine and the miracle they had created together. "More than I have words to say." Katherine leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her in gentle waves. "I know," she replied softly. "I feel the same." Outside their window, the first star of evening appeared in the darkening sky, a silver pinpoint of light that seemed to bless the small family within. From the creek came the soothing sound of flowing water, a reminder of beginnings and the endless renewal of life. For Katherine and Keenan Nash, the journey that had begun beside that other creek, Shivering, he offering warmth without questions, had led them here to this perfect moment of completion. Whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, their love a fire that would warm them through all seasons to come.